Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. Did you know there's one book in the Old Testament that you probably ever only read half of? Half of the book. That book is Daniel. It's one of the more controversial books in the Old Testament. The first half of the book is narrative. It tells the story of Daniel and his friends. The second half of the book is what we would call apocalyptic. Now, apocalyptic literature is literature that focuses on the future. It's literature that uses kind of strange symbolism a lot of times. It's literature that uses numbers as symbols, weird animal figures as symbols. Revelation is probably the book in the Bible that you're most familiar with that classifies as apocalyptic. And often apocalyptic literature is written in code language so that the people reading it would understand it, but the people that might be the oppressor or the person trying to make life miserable for God's people, if he picked it up, it wouldn't make any sense to him. The book of Daniel, the first part of Daniel, takes place during the time of the captivity, first under Babylon and later under Persia. And the first 6 chapters really break down into 6 stories. The first story is about Daniel and his friends. And in verse 6, you find out that these friends, among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. It's interesting to me that Daniel is known by his Hebrew name, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego we know by their Babylonian names. And they all have 2 names. In chapter 1 of Daniel, they are encouraged to eat the king's food, rich food, probably a lot of pork, other things that violated the dietary laws of the Hebrews. They wouldn't do it. And the outcome was that these 4 young men were head and shoulders in terms of wisdom, in terms of brilliance, in terms of physical fitness. They were head and shoulders above their Babylonian counterparts. The second story is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Nebuchadnezzar comes off as kind of a nutcase in this story because Nebuchadnezzar summons his men, his wise men, and he says, I had a dream last night. I want you to tell me what the dream means. And so the wise men say, well, sure, tell us the dream, we'll tell you what it means, because they have dream books at that time. They can look it up, they can figure out what the dream means. Nebuchadnezzar says, don't remember the dream. I know I dreamt, but I don't remember what the dream was, so tell me what the dream was and what it means. And the wise men said, this isn't the way it works. This isn't the way the thing works. You got to tell us the dream, and we tell you what it is. And Nebuchadnezzar starts losing his cool, and he, in effect, says, what good are y'all if you can't tell me the dream? And he does find Daniel, who is able to tell him the dream. The dream is an interesting dream. It's a dream of this statue made out of different materials and a great stone that comes and knocks down the whole statue. The materials talk about the coming rulers in the world. The Babylonians would give way to the Persians, who would give way to the Greeks, who would give way to the Romans. And within that Roman period would come this stone that would knock it all down, the Messiah, the Messianic age. It's looking ahead to when Jesus comes. And it's, interestingly, Nebuchadnezzar's dream that makes that happen. Chapter 3, you know this story. It's these 3 guys who refuse to bow down. In chapter 3, we kind of wonder where Daniel is. I don't know if you ever thought about that. But in chapter 3, they're all told to bow down to this idol. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't do it, and they are thrown into the furnace. When I get to heaven, I'm going to ask, where was Daniel at that time? Because Daniel wasn't thrown into the furnace. I want you to notice in chapter 3, verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. This is the matter of being thrown in the furnace instead of worshiping the gods. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, in other words, they aren't sure going into that furnace whether he's going to deliver them or not. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you've set up. So it doesn't make any difference if we fry in that oven or not. We're not worshiping your gods, because they are no gods at all. Nebuchadnezzar is mad, throws them in. You know the story. They're not burned up. Their clothes don't smell like smoke. And when he looks in the furnace, there's another guy in there. I would suggest maybe they're walking around in that furnace with Jesus, with the pre-incarnate Christ. Nebuchadnezzar comes, opens the door, and lets them out and praises the God of the Hebrews. Chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar goes crazy, goes absolutely stark raving mad, eats grass like an oxen. Interestingly, that doesn't appear in any secular stories. None of the accounts of the Babylonian Empire record that. But the kings were pretty careful about what they recorded, and I would guess that the kings did not record the event of a king going stark raving mad. Chapter 5 is the story of Belshazzar. He's not actually a king. He has a feast. Belshazzar is in the Babylonian court. He has a feast, and while he's having this feast, they bring out the sacred vessels that they had taken from the Jerusalem temple and use them in sacrifices and pouring out drink offerings to the gods. And all of a sudden this hand comes out, and you've heard this line about the handwriting on the wall. That's what this comes from. This hand comes out and writes on the wall, many, many tekel parsim. Nobody knows what that means. They can't figure it out. Daniel figures it out. He says, here's what it means. In verse 24, then from his presence the hand was sent, this writing was inscribed, and this is the writing that was inscribed, many, many tekel and parsim. This is the interpretation of the matter. Many. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. So basically the message is, Belshazzar, you ain't got no kingdom no more. Your kingdom is going to be turned over to the Persians. That night it was. Belshazzar was killed, and the Persians and Medes take over the empire. Chapter 6 is finally the story of Daniel under now the Persian rule, and Darius the Mede, a Persian Median king, is ruling the nation, and he is tricked into making a rule that nobody can pray to their God. Daniel is caught praying to his God, facing Jerusalem, praying to his God, and Daniel is put in the lion's den. You know this story too. It's in the Sunday school lessons. And God closes the lion's mouth. Darius is relieved because he likes Daniel and brings him back out the next day. A couple interesting things in that story that maybe don't make the Sunday school lessons. Verse 10 has an interesting phrasing. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, in other words, he knew what the law was, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. He knew the law. He knew the law was wrong. He knew that he had to do what he had to do, and he did it openly. The result of this whole thing is that Daniel prospers, and he prospers under Darius and then later Cyrus the Great. The rest of the book is a series of apocalyptic visions, and basically the message is God is in control of history. God is not out of control. He's in control of history. It may look like he's out of control sometimes, may look like evil is gaining the upper hand, but the message of apocalyptic literature is always God has control of this thing. He had control in Daniel's time, he had control through the rest of the Old Testament period, and he had control when he sent his son Jesus Christ to suffer and die for a world that needed that.